This is gonna blow your mind. One of the boldest warnings at the United Nations this year didn't come from a global superpower. It came from Eritrea, a country most people barely notice on the world stage. On January 26, 2026, the world's attention shifted to the UN Security Council, not for the usual superpower drama, but for something far more unexpected. The spotlight fell on Eritrea, a small nation in the Horn of Africa, whose voice would soon reverberate far beyond the walls of the chamber. Eritrea, often overlooked on the global stage, was about to make its presence felt in a way that few anticipated. The world watched as its representatives prepared to speak, curious about what message this resilient nation would bring. Eritrea's deputy permanent representative, Mr. Emmanuel Giorgio, delivered a message that cut through the noise, a message that challenged the very foundations of international diplomacy. He spoke with conviction, warning that the rules meant to protect all nations are being broken by those meant to uphold them. The chamber grew tense as delegates realized the gravity of his words. This wasn't a plea for aid or a report on a local crisis. This was a bold diagnosis of the global system's health, a rare moment of candor in a room often filled with diplomatic caution. Giorgio's words resonated deeply, not just with his fellow small nations, but with anyone who has ever felt the weight of injustice in international affairs. He gave voice to the anxieties of smaller nations, those who often feel sidelined or ignored in the halls of power. Giorgio reminded the world that all countries, big or small, deserve equal respect under the law. The principle of equality, he argued, is not just a lofty ideal, but a necessity for peace and stability. Eritrea, a nation often at odds with international institutions, now stood to defend the very principles those bodies were built on. The warning was clear: if the rules are bent for the powerful, trust in the system collapses for everyone. Selective justice by powerful states is making the world more dangerous and unpredictable. When the strong act with impunity, the weak lose faith in the promise of international law. Eritrea's perspective came from experience, shaped by years of conflict, isolation, and the constant struggle to maintain sovereignty in a turbulent region. The nation knows firsthand the fragility of sovereignty and the real-world impact of global debates that can determine the fate of millions. For Eritrea, these are not abstract issues. They are matters of survival, dignity, and national identity. Giorgio's address was a declaration. Small states will not stay silent as international law is eroded. Their voices, though sometimes quiet, carry the weight of justice and principle. The message was unmistakable. The world cannot afford to ignore the concerns of its smallest members. It was a call to return to first principles, to the founding ideals of the United Nations: justice, equality, and respect for all. Giorgio's words challenged world leaders to reflect on their own commitments and to ask themselves whether they are truly upholding the values they claim to defend. In that chamber, Eritrea's voice demanded the world take notice and reminded everyone that even the smallest nations can make the mightiest roar. Eritrea's warning came at a time of global turbulence, when the world seemed to be teetering on the edge of profound change. The international community was facing a series of crises that tested the very foundations of global cooperation and diplomacy. It was a critical juncture for the international order, with leaders from every continent grappling with challenges that threatened to reshape the balance of power and the rules that have governed nations for decades. Trust in the post-war system is fraying, as old alliances are tested and new conflicts erupt. The UN Security Council, once a symbol of collective action, is now often paralyzed by deep divisions and competing interests among its most powerful members. Just weeks before, a U.S. military operation in Venezuela, defended by some as an act of self-defense, condemned by others as a blatant violation of sovereignty, exposed deep rifts in the global consensus. The world watched as nations took sides, further eroding the fragile trust that underpins international law. The Council's emergency session revealed how easily rules can be bent or ignored by the powerful, raising urgent questions about the future of global governance and the ability of international institutions to hold all nations accountable. In Eritrea's own region, Israel's recognition of Somaliland threatened to ignite new crises, challenging established norms and risking instability in the Horn of Africa. Regional leaders scrambled to respond, aware that the consequences could ripple far beyond their borders. These events, from South America to the Horn of Africa, all pointed to the same trend. The foundational principles of the UN Charter are under strain, and the world is struggling to uphold the ideals of peace, sovereignty, and cooperation that once seemed unshakable. Eritrea's message was a warning in a storm, urging a course correction before the international order unravels completely. The world, it seemed, was at a crossroads, with the choices made now shaping the future for generations to come. The stakes, Eritrea argued, could not be higher. The time to act, to reaffirm the principles of international cooperation and justice, is now. At the heart of Eritrea's address was a defense of the core principles of international law. Giorgio spoke plainly. The UN Charter's promises are the pillars of global peace and security. Sovereign equality means every nation, large or small, has the same rights under international law. This principle rejects the old world of empires and domination. Territorial integrity and political independence are not just legal concepts. They're matters of survival for countries like Eritrea. Borders must be respected. No country should interfere in another's affairs. Disputes must be settled peacefully, not by force. The use of military power is only justified in self-defense. Eritrea insisted. These rules must be universal, not selectively applied. Only then can international relations avoid chaos and conflict. Eritrea's core warning. The system is in crisis because the rules are being systematically undermined. Giorgio argued the problem isn't a lack of rules, but a lack of will among powerful nations to follow them. Reckless unilateralism and hegemonic policies are eroding the foundations of global order. When powerful states act alone, militarily or economically, they send the message that rules are for the weak. Selective enforcement turns law into a tool of power, not justice. The UN Security Council, paralyzed by vetoes, often can't act when its most powerful members break the rules. Eritrea's diagnosis: the international system is failing to self-correct, and the project of multilateralism risks becoming an empty exercise. This, Eritrea warned, is the central crisis of our time. Eritrea's speech offered concrete examples of how the rule of law is eroding. The U.S. operation in Venezuela, justified as self-defense, condemned as unilateralism, showed how powerful states can bypass the UN and international norms. The prohibition on the use of force, a cornerstone of the UN Charter, is increasingly ignored when inconvenient. Economic sanctions, imposed unilaterally, devastate ordinary people and often lack legal basis. Eritrea, having faced such sanctions, knows their impact firsthand. The selective recognition of territories, like Israel's move on Somaliland, further destabilizes regions. Each precedent chips away at the rules-based order, replacing law with unchecked power. Eritrea's warning. This path leads back to a world where might makes right. Why listen to Eritrea? Because small states feel the consequences of a broken system first. They are the canaries in the coal mine. When rules crumble, they suffer most. Their only real defense is the integrity of international law. When Eritrea defends these principles, it speaks for dozens of vulnerable nations worldwide. Eritrea's own experience with international scrutiny gives its message credibility. Its refusal to engage with what it sees as politicized UN processes is framed as a demand for impartiality and universal standards. Eritrea's voice challenges the status quo, insisting a fairer system is possible. It calls for genuine multilateralism, where every nation's security is valued equally. The stability of the system depends on protecting its weakest members. Ignoring this warning puts everyone at risk. Eritrea's speech was more than critique. It was a call to action. The vision, a just, balanced, polycentric world order with multiple centers of power, not one dominated by a few. In such a system, no single power dictates outcomes. Cooperation and consensus become necessities. Eritrea urged all nations to recommit to the UN Charter's principles, not just in words, but in deeds. Powerful states must accept that international law constrains them too. Eritrea implicitly called for UN reform, especially of the Security Council, to reflect today's realities. The demand, a more democratic, representative, and effective global system. Only then can the world move beyond crisis to genuine collective security. Eritrea's message to the world concluded with the powerful words of President Isaias Afwerki, grounding its appeal in the shared hopes and dreams of all humanity. His vision was not just for Eritrea, but for every nation and every person, emphasizing the importance of universal values that unite us all. The universal aspiration of the peoples of the world is clear. Every individual, regardless of their background, seeks to live in peace and dignity, to benefit fairly from their labor, to see the fruits of their work shared justly, and to support one another in solidarity, building communities where compassion and mutual aid are at the heart of daily life. This vision, President Isaias explained, transcends borders, cultures, and ideologies. It calls on the world to recognize that our differences should not divide us, but rather inspire us to create systems that serve the basic needs of all people. Eritrea argued that if a new world order is to emerge, it must be founded on the pillars of peace, dignity, fairness, and solidarity, values that are essential for lasting progress. The rules and institutions of global governance, he insisted, should be measured by whether they truly advance these values and uplift the lives of ordinary people everywhere. The challenge before us is not only to critique the injustices of the old order, but to actively participate in building a new one that stands on a solid foundation of justice and equality. Eritrea's vision is clear: a world where human well-being, happiness, and the fulfillment of every person's potential are the ultimate goals, guiding the future of our global community. As Eritrea's warning faded from the Security Council, a question lingered. Was anyone truly listening? Smaller nations likely saw their own fears reflected in Eritrea's words, a rare validation of their perspective. Emerging powers found an ally in the call for a more balanced world order. But for the powerful, the response was muted, perhaps dismissed as familiar rhetoric or self-interest. The real test isn't in diplomatic statements, but in future actions. Will there be renewed commitment to multilateralism and equal application of international law? Will calls for reform finally lead to change? Eritrea, a small state with a big message, has sounded the alarm. The world now faces a choice: heed the warning or continue toward the rocks. Only time will tell.